I thought my marriage was unbreakable, built on love and trust that spanned decades, until a single revelation turned my world upside down. What I uncovered not only shattered my heart but forced me to question everything I believed about the life we had built together. My journey took an unexpected turn last Thursday. I was scheduled to attend a conference in Minneapolis over Thursday and Friday, but it didn't start the way I'd hoped. Normally, my wife, Martha, would take half a day off work to make my departure feel special. She'd see me off with warmth and care, a ritual I had come to treasure. This time, however, all I got was a quick kiss goodbye before she hurried off to work. Let me tell you a bit about myself. My name's Ava, though many people call me Evan. I'm 49 years old and have been married to Martha for 24 wonderful years. Together, we've raised 2 children, Ross, who is 22, and Amelia, who recently turned 20. That Thursday afternoon, my journey began at 3 p.m. sharp. I left work and made my way to the airport, as I always like to arrive early for my 6 p.m. flight. It gave me peace of mind, knowing I wouldn't be stressed about running late. Things seemed to be going smoothly at first. I passed the time patiently, waiting for the announcement of my flight's departure. But luck wasn't on my side that day. A severe snowstorm brewing in Minnesota caused delays. The flight was held back for 45 minutes before we were finally allowed to board. About 30 minutes into the air, I noticed the plane making a subtle turn to the left. At first, I thought it was just a minor course correction. However, the captain soon announced that landing in Minneapolis was impossible due to worsening weather conditions. We were heading back to our departure point. Back on solid ground, I rushed to the airline's check-in desk to salvage my travel plans. Thankfully, I managed to secure one of the last remaining seats on a flight scheduled for the next morning. Though I was disappointed to miss part of the conference, I remained hopeful about making it for the remainder. As I sat down to regroup, I made a series of calls. First, I updated my contact in Minneapolis about the delay, leaving a detailed voicemail for my boss. Then, hoping for some comfort, I called home to speak with Martha. That's when the first unsettling surprise struck. She didn't answer. When I finally arrived home, the house was eerily dark, and Martha's car wasn't in the driveway. With a growing sense of unease, I left my luggage in the car and cautiously stepped inside. From the living room, I heard voices, familiar yet unexpected. I moved closer and found the TV blaring, even though I distinctly remembered turning it off before I left. The realization hit me: Martha had been home after work but had left in a hurry, leaving the TV on. I silenced it, and my search for her began. Room after room yielded no sign of her, and my anxiety grew with every moment. Something wasn't right. When I finally reached Martha on her mobile phone, her voice was warm and filled with concern, asking me where I was, a question that had become a familiar part of our routine. Her tone seemed genuine, even comforting. She casually mentioned that she was at home watching some TV shows. As she spoke, the exhaustion from my disrupted journey began to catch up with me. All I wanted was to be with my wife, to unwind in her presence, and to find solace in our shared closeness, even if only for a few hours. Despite everything, I was looking forward to the comfort of home, the warmth of our bed, and the feeling of normalcy. But within moments, my sense of peace was replaced by something darker: uncertainty and unease. The expectation of a warm embrace from the woman I'd loved and trusted for 24 years was shattered by an unsettling realization. Something wasn't adding up. Her words didn't match what I had found at home. A wave of doubt washed over me, leaving me speechless. Was Martha lying to me? And if so, why? The idea that she might be deceiving me, even betraying me, was inconceivable. My mind raced with questions. Could this have happened while she was at work, out with friends, or even during an innocuous trip to a restaurant? None of it made sense. I sat there in silence, grappling with the possibility, unwilling to fully accept it. In my confusion, I thought of Amelia. If anyone might know about Martha's plans or surprises, it would be her. Without hesitation, I dialed my daughter's number from memory. Her familiar voice greeted me, cheerful and caring, as she asked how I was. I took a moment to ask about her day, genuinely curious and eager to ground myself in a sense of normalcy. Amelia told me she had just finished her homework and was relaxing with some TV. Encouraged by her warmth, I cautiously asked if she'd spoken to her mother recently. Her response was casual, nothing unusual, and for a moment, I considered whether I was simply overthinking the situation. But my doubts lingered. Why would Martha feel the need to lie to me? My mind began to formulate explanations. Could it be related to her work? Perhaps it was about the promotion she had been striving for. That seemed logical. Martha had been staying late at work more often lately, her dedication unwavering as she pursued her goals. Maybe, I reasoned, she didn't want to worry me or burden me with the challenges of her ambitions. Yet, even with that explanation, something didn't sit right. No promotion, no matter how significant, could justify the growing sense of disconnect I was beginning to feel between us. This wasn't the first time we had faced big decisions as a couple. Over the years, we had countless discussions about balancing work and family, always striving to keep our priorities in focus. As I sat there, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on me. I realized I was at risk of losing sight of what truly mattered in my life, my wife and our children. I resolved then to seek clarity, to understand what was happening, and to hold on to the foundation we had built together over the years. Faced with an overwhelming mix of emotions, I made a heartfelt decision to decline the promotion that had been offered to me. It wasn't easy to walk away from the material success it promised, but I realized my commitment to my family had to come first. Over the years, Martha and I had always navigated life together, but I couldn't deny the widening distance between us. As time went on, our physical connection had diminished, and the absence of intimacy in our marriage was difficult to ignore. I wondered if her recent actions, her vague responses during our phone calls, were an attempt to avoid discussing these issues, masking them behind her work commitments. Still, I couldn't place the blame entirely on her. I had been traveling for business, working overtime occasionally, and perhaps inadvertently contributing to the gap between us. But even with these considerations, the gnawing suspicion lingered. If I truly wanted answers, I knew I had to act. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to call Martha's direct line at her workplace. My heart sank when her coworker, Jake, informed me that Martha had taken vacation time and wouldn't be back until the end of the week. Panic began to tighten its grip on me, creeping into every corner of my mind. Where was she? What could she be doing? An unwelcome thought, a silent yet persistent fear, began to surface. Could it really be true that she was deceiving me? I tried to push the idea aside, clinging to the belief that people are inherently good, that Martha was incapable of such betrayal. But against my will, the worst-case scenario began to unfold in my mind. I couldn't stop myself from questioning everything I thought I knew about her. As I grappled with this growing dread, another memory surfaced. Not long ago, I overheard a peculiar conversation between Martha and her friend Victoria. Victoria had mentioned an incident involving her husband, casually remarking on how he had smiled at her after what had transpired the day before, in the back seat of her car, no less. Martha had responded disapprovingly, cautioning Victoria about the risks of such behavior and warning her about the consequences if she were caught. Victoria, unfazed, had shrugged off the warning, confidently asserting that she was always careful. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now, the memory returned with chilling clarity, casting Martha's words in a new, unsettling light. Was her cautioning tone genuine concern for Victoria, or was there more to it, something I had missed in the moment? The ambiguity of that conversation left me reeling, and I couldn't ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Struggling with uncertainty, I questioned whether confronting Martha with my fears was the right approach. Would anger and accusations drive a wedge further between us, or were they the only way to get to the truth? I decided to reach out to someone I trusted for advice. Explaining the situation, I asked a simple yet loaded question: what should I do? The response was measured and careful, reflecting the complexity of the circumstances. They suggested that my approach would depend on the specifics of the situation, encouraging me to weigh the factors at play. While I sought clarity, it became painfully clear that there were no easy answers. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was undeniable: I needed to address the rift between us and uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. In a bid to gain insight, I brought up a hypothetical scenario during a late-night conversation with Mike, my father-in-law. I mentioned a situation involving his favorite son-in-law, and whether he'd turn a blind eye if that son-in-law were to betray someone close to him. Mike, ever light-hearted, chuckled and reminded me that I was his only son-in-law, thus automatically his favorite. His tone shifted as he asked what was so urgent to warrant a call so late in the evening. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what I had to say next. "Mike," I began cautiously, "I overheard something serious, and I felt you needed to know. It's about your spouse." There was a brief silence on the line as I grappled with how to continue. "She hasn't been faithful," I said at last, my voice trembling. "She cheated on you, just yesterday." The pause that followed was agonizing, the weight of my revelation sinking in. Mike's shock was palpable, even through the silence. I felt a pang of guilt for delivering such devastating news, yet I knew it was better he heard the truth. Later that night, I was jolted awake by my phone ringing. Groggy, I answered as quietly as possible, trying not to disturb Martha. On the other end was Victoria, furious and demanding answers. Her voice was sharp with anger as she berated me for telling Mike about her infidelity. Despite her outburst, I kept my tone calm, explaining that I had simply told him the truth. I stressed the importance of honesty, especially in situations like this. Martha, lying beside me, watched with concern, her face a mix of worry and resolve. Victoria's disbelief was evident as she lashed out again. "How could you accuse my sister of such a betrayal?" she demanded. I responded firmly, "Sometimes the truth surfaces when we least expect it, Victoria. It's not about accusations, it's about facing reality." The conversation ended tensely, but I was determined to stand by what I had said. That night, Martha and I managed to drift off to sleep despite the weight of the situation. However, the morning brought its own challenges. Martha's father called, his voice raised in anger as he chastised his daughter. Martha was visibly shaken and tearful after the call. I took her aside to reassure her, explaining that we had discussed the importance of seeking advice and potentially ending our connection with those who deceive us. I clarified that during my conversation with Mike, I had only used a hypothetical example to discuss honesty and hadn't claimed that any specific betrayal had occurred. Still, the tension in the house lingered. I felt the strain of trying to navigate these emotional waters while protecting the trust within our own relationship. Amidst this chaos, life took an unexpected turn. I soon found myself standing on a stage at a conference, addressing a vast audience. As I delivered my speech, I spoke about two types of people: those who deny the truth and those who confront reality, no matter how painful it may be. My words resonated, and the room grew quiet as I shared my reflections. In an unexpected twist, Dave Millant, Martha's boss, raised his hand from the audience. With a nervous expression, he confessed to having crossed boundaries with my wife. His admission stunned the crowd, and me. Moments later, Jake Turnbull, another colleague of Martha's, also stepped forward, echoing a similar confession. A third man joined them, confirming suspicions I hadn't even voiced. The weight of their revelations hit me hard, and while the public nature of their confessions was unexpected, it brought a strange sense of clarity to a storm I had been weathering in silence. I realized then that the truth, however painful, had its own way of surfacing. It was now up to me to decide what to do with it. In a state of unease, I opened the tracking application on my phone to check Martha's location. Within seconds, the app revealed her phone was at Mills Lake. The name alone puzzled me. Mills Lake was an upscale area, far removed from our modest means. It didn't make sense for her to be there. Adding to the mystery, Victoria, her sister, had been facing financial struggles, making it highly unlikely for her to afford a place in such a luxurious neighborhood. The situation grew more perplexing with every passing moment. Driven by anxiety, I set out toward the estate. My mind raced with questions as the anticipation of what I might discover weighed heavily on me. When I arrived, I was greeted by a massive gate, a barrier that signaled exclusivity and ensured privacy for its residents. Driving straight to the house to confront Martha was out of the question. I decided to observe from a distance, parking further away to avoid drawing attention from security or law enforcement. Steeling myself, I surveyed the property and caught sight of a man in the yard. He appeared older than me, and though he was vaguely familiar, I couldn't place him. Before I could get a better look, he disappeared from view. Moments later, a woman emerged onto the patio, confirming what I had feared. It was Victoria. She stood in a loosely tied robe, sipping champagne, her demeanor unbothered and almost smug. Despite her age, she retained an air of confidence and beauty that only deepened the unsettling scene before me. As I peered closer, the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. It wasn't just Victoria's presence that solidified my growing suspicions, it was the implications. The luxury of the setting, Martha's whereabouts, and Victoria's behavior painted a vivid picture. The truth I had been dreading was now undeniable: Martha was with her sister, and the nature of her secrecy was tied to this hidden rendezvous. Peeking into the living room through a window, I saw something that stopped me cold. Martha was sprawled out on a couch, an inebriated grin plastered across her face. Her robe hung loosely, carelessly revealing far more than I wanted to see. It was a sight that shattered me to my core. The bond we had shared for decades seemed to dissolve in an instant, replaced by betrayal and heartbreak. In my shock, I took an unsteady step back, but my foot slipped. I tumbled down from the tree where I had been perched, branches breaking my fall as I crashed to the ground. Stunned and disoriented, I was fortunate to escape with only minor injuries. Yet, the emotional weight of what I had witnessed far exceeded the physical pain. Standing there, dazed and feeling older than my years, I found myself wandering aimlessly, as though adrift in a desolate world. My thoughts were a storm of anger, sadness, and disbelief. The finality of what I had seen left me questioning everything I had built my life around. I knew I had decisions to make. Returning home to pack my belongings and leave Martha seemed like the logical step. If we lived in a no-fault divorce state, with no dependent children and separate incomes, the process would likely be straightforward. We could divide our property and go our separate ways. Yet, the simplicity of that path didn't sit well with me. A part of me craved something more: justice, perhaps, or even revenge. The sting of betrayal was too fresh, too sharp, to let go so easily. An audacious idea began to form in my mind, and before I could second-guess myself, I decided to act on it. The plan, though bold and perhaps irrational, felt like the only way to regain control in a situation where everything seemed lost. I decided to seize the moment, my mind racing with the possibilities of how this might unfold. Gripping my phone tightly, I pictured Martha reaching for hers, anxiously checking her voicemail, searching for clarity amidst the chaos. I silently hoped that she was intoxicated enough not to realize I couldn't have used my mobile phone during the supposed flight. Panic was likely building within her as she scrambled to control the situation. I imagined her hastily dressing, fielding frantic questions from her sister and lover, and rushing home, trying to stay one step ahead of me. As I sat in my car, thinking through my next steps, my phone rang. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but I answered anyway, ready to act if necessary. The call brought a mix of anxiety and resolve. I quickly dialed special services, reporting a reckless driver I had witnessed. Describing the erratic behavior of a dark blue Ford Taurus, I detailed how the car had swerved dangerously and nearly collided with mine. To add credibility, I mentioned the vehicle pulling off onto the south side of the highway near Mills Lake. I even recited the last 4 digits of its license plate, which I had memorized earlier, emphasizing the urgency of stopping the driver before someone got hurt. The drastic step wasn't out of spite, but rather a desperate attempt to protect what remained of my life, especially for the sake of my children. As I reflected, the weight of my fears surfaced, laying bare the fragility and preciousness of life. My love for Martha, once an unwavering foundation, no longer guided my choices. It wasn't that I had stopped loving her, my feelings were still complex, but I could no longer envision a future with her. That vision had been shattered beyond repair. Needing solitude to process everything, I took drastic measures. I turned off the home phone and silenced my mobile, retreating into the quiet to gather my thoughts. The hours I had spent chasing answers felt like a blur now. The painful realization hit me hard: I might have to face a life without Martha, a thought that felt insurmountable. Starting over seemed like a labyrinth of uncertainty. How could I plan a life without the person who had been my partner for decades, my everything? The pain deepened, almost unbearable at times. For a brief, dark moment, I even contemplated finding peace beneath the stillness of a bridge. Such thoughts terrified me, yet they laid bare the depth of my despair. Life without Martha seemed unthinkable, and the task of rebuilding from scratch loomed large. Our history together flashed before my eyes. We had shared so much, weathered storms, raised children, and built a home. Yet, somewhere along the way, the dynamic had shifted. When our children grew up and left home, I had seen it as an opportunity to invest more deeply in our relationship. Martha, however, had seemed to drift away, her care and attention waning as the years passed. I couldn't help but wonder, when had we lost each other? Was it gradual, unnoticed in the busyness of raising a family? Or had there been a turning point I had failed to see? As I sat there, the questions swirled in my mind, unanswered and heavy. I had always thought of us as unbreakable. But now, faced with the reality of betrayal and the fragility of trust, I knew I had reached a crossroads. My next step would determine the course of my life, and I had to choose carefully. I hadn't realized until now that Martha had seen this as the end of our shared journey. Watching her with someone else, a stranger who had somehow become a fixture in her life, made it painfully clear how comfortable they had grown together, or perhaps, how easily deceit had made its way into our marriage. Martha and her lover's actions left me feeling abandoned and unloved, a stark reminder of the distance that had grown between us. Reflecting on my life, I was struck by how little material possessions mattered to me. Though I wasn't raised in a wealthy household, I had the privilege of growing up in a family rich in love and affection. That sense of connection had always been more valuable than the material things that now surrounded me. In comparison, the home Martha and I had built together, filled with objects and memories, felt hollow and insignificant. When I thought about what truly mattered, I realized the only possessions worth taking with me were clothes, my car, and my laptop. The more I reflected, the clearer my path forward became. I decided to pack my essentials and leave, vanishing without a trace to start anew. This wasn't just about escaping a painful situation, it was about reclaiming my freedom and seeking a life where I could find true happiness and peace. Before leaving, I felt compelled to address Martha, to put my feelings into words even though speaking to her had become futile. I sat down to write a letter, each word heavy with the weight of disappointment and heartbreak. Martha. It pains me to write this, but I feel it is necessary to leave you with my thoughts. Seeing you now, I can't help but recognize a path you've chosen, a reckless road filled with fleeting moments and empty connections. It's a path I've seen before, one that echoes the choices your sister has made, leading to loneliness and regret. Perhaps it's a legacy passed down, but it doesn't have to define you. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I've made arrangements to ensure you're financially stable for the immediate future. Beyond that, I hope you find clarity in the days to come. I wish you the best, even if our paths are no longer entwined. Evan. After finishing the letter, I turned my attention to practical matters. I couldn't leave without ensuring Martha and the household would have some stability in my absence. I tackled our finances with precision. First, I paid off the shared credit card debt and promptly closed the accounts. Then, I went to the bank, withdrawing the full amount from our savings and securities accounts. I left enough in the checking account to cover the mortgage and utility bills for the next 2 months, ensuring that Martha wouldn't face immediate financial hardship. Taking these steps was bittersweet, a mix of detachment and care. Each action was a step closer to independence, a move toward a life unburdened by deceit and betrayal. It wasn't an easy choice, but as I left the bank and turned toward an uncertain future, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. I was finally ready to walk away and rebuild, piece by piece, a life that was entirely my own. After leaving the bank, I took one final step to sever my financial ties with Martha. I removed my name from our joint account. Holding a check for approximately $250,000, I began envisioning my next move. By noon, I was already in contact with a relocation agent, exploring housing options in an area known for its reasonable prices and comfortable living conditions. We quickly reached an agreement, sealing it with a handshake. He promised to spread the word that my departure from work was voluntary, avoiding unnecessary speculation. The next step was critical, meeting with my lawyer to finalize the separation. Sitting across from him, I explained my decision to divorce Martha. I instructed him to serve her with the divorce papers and grant her power of attorney to sell the house, which accounted for half of our total assets. Despite the gravity of the situation, my lawyer, also a close family friend, offered his unwavering support. I assured him I'd keep him updated and promised to call regularly. The conversation ended with mutual expressions of care, a brief but meaningful moment of solidarity during an otherwise challenging time. Afterward, I turned my attention to my children. I first called Ross. The conversation was bittersweet, filled with reassurances of love and a promise to stay in touch. Ross, always a source of strength, reciprocated with his own words of care and concern. Then I spoke with Amelia. Her reaction was heart-wrenching. I told her the truth about her mother's actions, and we shared the weight of that pain together. Amelia, like me, struggled to comprehend how Aunt Victoria's influence had led to such destruction in our family. Through these conversations, it became clear that my children, though deeply hurt, were determined to move forward. Ross decided to split his summer between Martha and me, a decision that brought its own challenges. Amelia, however, was shaken when she mentioned wanting to live with me for the summer. Martha's reaction had been so volatile that I found it necessary to step away from my phone for a few days, unable to process her escalating behavior. A month later, I moved into a beautiful house in a serene condominium. It wasn't just a new home, it was a fresh start. Despite the difficulties, the neighborhood was welcoming. My colleagues, led by a younger, approachable manager who fostered camaraderie, made me feel like a valued member of the team. That sense of belonging brought solace during an otherwise turbulent period. Throughout this time, I maintained no direct contact with Martha, relying only on updates from my lawyer and my children. Moving forward wasn't easy, there were challenges and moments of doubt, but I remained resolute in my decision to rebuild my life. My focus shifted to creating a stable, nurturing environment for Ross and Amelia whenever they spent time with me. I promised Amelia I'd visit her and her grandparents as often as possible, a commitment I intended to keep despite the hurdles. While Martha's behavior continued to spiral, my resolve to move on and provide a better future for myself and my children only grew stronger. It was a new chapter, born of pain but filled with the promise of healing and hope. I consciously avoided asking about Martha, choosing instead to focus on moving forward with my life. It wasn't an easy task. Memories of our time together lingered, refusing to fade completely. Martha, however, used our children as intermediaries, expressing remorse for her actions through them. She repeatedly tried to convey her willingness to do anything to prove her love for me. While I understood that Ross and Amelia secretly hoped for reconciliation between their parents, I couldn't bring myself to entertain the idea of reconnecting with Martha. Too much had been broken. The physical distance between us only added to the strain on our children. They were forced to navigate the emotional burden of choosing between their mother and me. It was a dilemma I deeply regretted placing them in, yet it seemed unavoidable. Meanwhile, Martha remained relentless in her attempts to uncover details of my life through the children, hoping for some window back into my world. One afternoon, everything came to a head. I was in the kitchen, finishing up some work while Louise, my partner, cradled our 1-year-old daughter in her arms. When the doorbell rang, I thought little of it, assuming it was a neighbor or a delivery. Louise, her distinct Spanish accent coloring her voice, went to answer it. From my vantage point, I saw the surprise on Martha's face as Louise greeted her. There was a brief, awkward pause before Martha expressed her desire to speak with me. Louise, calm and composed, called out for me, handing me the baby as I approached. The joy radiating from my daughter's face steadied my resolve. As I stood there, holding my daughter, Martha's expression shifted. Her astonishment turned to heartbreak. She mumbled something incoherent, her eyes welling up with tears. I remained composed, speaking to her with sincerity. "Martha," I began, "I sincerely wish you a joyful life, one filled with the kind of love and happiness I've found." My voice carried genuine sentiments, free of bitterness. Tears streamed down Martha's face as she took a hesitant step forward. She embraced me briefly, her touch tentative and filled with unspoken emotions. Then, without another word, she turned and hurriedly left the house. As the door closed behind her, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, closure, and a renewed sense of purpose. The encounter had drawn a line under a chapter of my life that was both beautiful and painful. Now, I was ready to move forward, fully embracing the life I had built for myself and my daughter, leaving the past where it belonged. As I closed the door behind Martha, I leaned against it, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. Louise, ever attuned to my emotions, emerged from the kitchen, her expression a mix of concern and relief. She gently took Tamarita from my arms, sensing that I needed a moment to process. Her quiet presence brought me comfort, a reminder that even in the face of pain, I was no longer alone. Reflecting on how far I'd come, I realized I was no longer bound by the fears and insecurities that once held me back. I was less timid, less afraid of opening myself up to others. For the first time, I began to seriously consider Louise's earlier suggestion to introduce me to someone kind and suitable, someone who might bring genuine happiness back into my life. Trusting her judgment, I entertained the idea, even feeling a flicker of hope at the prospect of a fresh start. But the encounter with Martha stirred doubts, not about my decision to leave her, which remained unwavering, but about the assumptions I had carried with me. I found myself questioning whether I was truly ready to move forward romantically or if I was simply seeking closure in the wrong way. Louise's presence reassured me, yet I knew this was a decision I needed to make carefully. My thoughts drifted to my daughter, Tamarita. She was the light of my life, and I wondered whether I might one day give her a sibling. The idea was comforting, though I wasn't sure it was the right time, or even the right decision for me. What I was certain of, however, was that I no longer owed Martha anything. The choice to disclose my future plans, or keep them private, was now solely mine. This newfound freedom brought a sense of relief, as if a weight had finally been lifted. Despite this, life had a way of reminding me how fragile it truly is. Yesterday, I stood by Martha's grave, flanked by my children and a gathering of relatives, including Victoria. As I gazed at the casket, tears flowed freely, grief mingling with unresolved emotions. I wept bitterly, not just for what was lost, but for the memories that could never be reclaimed. Amid the mourning, I scanned the faces around me. Every tear shed seemed to carry its own story of love, regret, or sorrow. Yet when my eyes fell on Victoria, I noticed something startling: her face was dry, untouched by tears. Her stoicism stood in stark contrast to the raw emotion surrounding her, leaving me with a lingering sense of unease. In the days ahead, I knew the path would remain difficult, but I also knew I had taken the first steps toward healing. For now, I held on to the hope that the next chapter of my life would be defined by peace, love, and the unwavering bond one shared with my children.